In this video, I'll show you how I made this and all of these two-layer vinyl cut decals using a Silhouette Cameo 3 and Silhouette Design Studio. So let's get started. Getting started here, you can see that I'm in Silhouette Studio. I'm using Designer Edition, but Basic Edition will work for this as I'm not doing anything out of the ordinary for the regular functions. This is my graphic on the left here, this all black one that I created, and you'll have to make your own process or create a process to create your design. All I did in this case was I found the font for the Fast and the Furious series, typed out the letters, and then kind of just rearranged them into this graphic that you see here, and then I just grouped it together, which is why it's all in one piece here. Ultimately though, we want to make a two-layered black background, red font as you can see here, and it's going to be two layers again, black with red letters that go on top to create that effect as you see with this graphic here. But before we get started, let's go ahead and get everything set up with your Silhouette Studio in Designer Edition so you can do this. So as you can see, I'm here on the basic opening screen, if you will. What I've done so far is just I've turned off my grid by clicking off the show grid, and I'm in the page setup, which should be by default the top. In my case, the top right here looks like a piece of paper with a fold on the corner. So I just turn it off so it's easier to see as I put things inside the mat, at least for now. The other things that I like to do for setting up is make sure that all of my design area setup is the way I want it to. And so for this, we're going to be using the Cameo. I'm using a Cameo 3, so just select Auto Cameo, or you can just select Cameo itself. If you're using a cutting mat, make sure you specify that. And I am going to be using a 12 by 12 inch cutting mat, and so I do have that set to 12 by 12 inch cutting mat. If you're using a bigger one, make sure you select the appropriate size cutting mat, or if you're not using a cutting mat, make sure you select that as well. And then your media size, I just have it defaulted right now for 12 by 12 because I am using a 12 by 12. I'm not going to be cutting on a specific piece of media that's a size like this letter, like letter size, for example, 8.5 by 11. That would be for different purposes here. Basically, for our purposes, you want to make sure you put your graphic inside your mat with the vinyl that's going to be set up big enough that your graphic can be cut out of that. Alright, I also do like to turn on this show the cut border, where you can see this thin red line here right around the edges. You can turn that off, but I like to show that just so I make sure I stay away from those areas, because as I understand it, that cut border is, if you're in it, then your blade will not cut this section right here. Let me zoom in just a little bit. So, for example, if I had my graphic just over the edge like that, but I'm still in the mat in the white, this portion of my graphic actually would not get cut. And so you want to make sure that you stay within your cut border, and that's why I like to turn that on. We're not messing with printing or anything today. This is just going to be die cut two-layered decals. Alright, so first things first, to get started in actually doing this is we're going to be basically making two separate decals that we're going to overlay on top of each other. One's going to be the actual lettering and one's going to be the background, as you see here. So how do we get to that? What I like to do is, off of my original graphic, I will replicate it, and you can do that by holding your control button and then pressing one of your directional arrow buttons. I just press down, and so it makes a copy just below your original here, as you can see that. You can also do Control C, you can right click copy and then right click paste, and then or Control V for that as well, whatever preference you want. I found that holding the control and directional arrow is just a quick little hack. So the next thing that I want to do here is I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to throw this right in the center right here. I threw it in the center by hitting this button right here, which is a centering button, center to page button, excuse me. And so now that this is in center of a page, and this is just so that I can make sure that I keep things in line, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to convert this into a compound path. And as you can see, it hollowed out all my colors, and this is kind of what it would look like if you didn't go ahead and color in your graphics using your palette button here or your fill button. The reason I converted this to a compound path is because now it allows me to go ahead and offset the design. Up in the top right here, at least defaulted, mine is offset select, offset your select shape, and what it'll do is put a border around it. As you can see, I clicked it and it put a border around, and this menu for offset came up. It's defaulted to offset on the outside, not an internal. and then the distance away from the original graphic is 0.125 inches here, and then you can change that here, as you can see me doing. As I click this down, you can see it getting tighter to the graphic itself. If I bump it up, you can see it getting further away. So the default is 1.25, and that's what I have this graphic here set to right now. Okay, so by doing so, now I actually have two graphics, so I can move this out. As you saw, I had this one here in two separate pieces, and so, but you can see when I did this, there's a little extra piece right there in the middle that I don't want, because when I cut it, that's going to cut out in the middle, and that's just a pain to take out and weed out later when you don't necessarily need to. Again, this is going to be a solid background that this graphic sits on top of. So now I'm just going to click it once, and then you see it's one whole item. So I'm going to right click again, and I'm going to release this compound path. And now you see that little dot inside there has a square around it. I'm going to select that square, and I'm going to go ahead and delete it so that my machine doesn't try to cut that little chunk out later. Now I'm going to put these two back together by hitting the I'm going to put this here in the center page. I'm going to put this in the center page, and it puts it right back together, which is why I threw everything in the center, at least for now. Alright, so for now, so I don't misalign that, I'm going to go ahead and group the two items. And then in this case, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of rectangles above my graphic. And what these are for, and I just used this rectangle drawing tool. You can pick whatever shape you want, really. And what these are, they're going to be registration marks that you can use for later for when we go ahead and do the layering process of this. And I'm just going to go ahead and make sure these two rectangles are in the same horizontal plane. Alright, so now I have basically 4 cuttable images that my machine will cut. Right now it's sort of layered, but I want to go ahead and start separating these things out. Now on my cutting mat, I'm going to have about the top half in black vinyl and the bottom half in red. So however you set up your cutting mat with the vinyl on there, or you can cut 2 separate chunks, do 2 separate passes, if you will, to make your different layers. Anyway, so right now I'm going to ungroup these two here now, so that way this one goes back. I can move this out. And so knowing that I want this on its own, and then I also want this on its own, I can't do that quite yet because I need to have basically two copies that would perfectly align back up to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click each of my registration. Actually, let me group the 2 registration blocks together. Boom, that way they move as one piece. Okay, and so I'm going to click that one as one item, and then I'm going to hold my shift button down, and I'm going to click on the inside here so that I click this I'm fast as F boy, and what it does is selects those 2 boxes, or at least the boxes as one item, and then this fast as F boy, and then I'm going to go ahead and replicate that by holding Control and then pressing my down button. Okay, and so you can see that it only copied the 2 rectangles and the I'm fast as F boy, and I'm going to group these together just so that I don't misplace things. Everything has to stay in the same positions relative to each other. And what I'm going to do here, now that I have this taken out of it and my registration marks copied relative to where they need to be, I'm going to go ahead and delete out that middle part there, and then I'm going to group this. So now I have one graphic that moves together, and then I have this graphic that moves on its own. Alright, and so I had said or alluded to earlier that on my cutting mat, I'm going to have my black vinyl on basically the top half of my cutting mat, and my red vinyl on the bottom half of my cutting mat. And so here I might recommend you go ahead and turn back on your grid. So go to your page setup window, go to this grid area for grid settings, and then click show your grid. And so each of these blocks here, I have each of these dark line blocks as 1-inch markers, so I know that as long as my vinyl that I've set up on my mat is 5 inches down, and then my red starts from below there. So as long as I keep this part of the graphic within this area here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, within this 5 inches, I'm fine. Now I'm going to go ahead and color this just so it's a little bit easier to see what we're doing here. So I know my background's going to be black, and then I know my lettering, I'm going to make that red. All right, and so now basically I have this all set up to cut on my mat. Here I have my cutting mat all set up already, and you can see that my vinyl is on the top half here down to the 5-inch mark, which will be black, which is my background, and then down here I have from 5 to 10 inches the red vinyl, which is going to be the actual lettering itself set up on the mat. And so basically you'll want to make sure that you place your graphics in Designer Studio within the parameters or the area of how you set up your mat. And so the next step is, once we've got that all set up and I've confirmed that this will fit within the black area of my mat setup and this will fit in the red area of my mat setup, I'm going to go ahead over to Send, and it'll bring you up to this window area here. And so basically what you'll want to do is go ahead and make sure that everything is ready to go. I'm going to use simple, and I'm going to go with my auto blade, which is going to be for me in tool 1. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and select everything here. Everything is going to be cut at the same time, so I'm going to hit regular cut, which is this one right here, and notice everything is in red for my red auto blade tool. And then I'm going to make sure that my settings for material, action, and tool are correct. And so here right now it's set to cut for heat transfer vinyl, but I don't want to do that. I'm going to be using Oracal 651 in just regular gloss. So if you scroll down in the drop down menu, just look for vinyl, and I have found vinyl glossy for Oracal 651, and the default settings for that of a blade depth of 1 with a force of 10 and a speed of 5 works absolutely just fine. Make sure that your action is set to cut and not for sketching, and then that your tool is appropriate. I have my auto blade set up in my tool 1, so that's why I want to make sure that is set up to auto blade. Okay, so now that I have everything ready to go, I might recommend, before you actually do this, if you haven't calibrated or tested your cutting machine in a while, maybe go ahead and use your test function here, which will cut a small triangle and square towards the top left. Anyway, so when you're ready to go and this is ready and set up, just go ahead and hit send, and your machine will start cutting. So the next step is to go ahead and weed out the vinyl from after your machine is finished cutting it. And so here I've got my 2 vinyl pieces that have been cut out, and I'm just going to weed this out. Again, I used Oracal 651, which is a fairly easy vinyl to weed out. Simply just peeled that off, and I like to use a X-Acto knife as far as weeding out some of the smaller areas and items here, like the interior parts of these letters. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that here real quick. All right, so that was pretty easy to weed out. So I'm going to go ahead and peel off the excess here for this next vinyl chunk. And this has nothing to weed out because that's just a black background that this will now go on top of. And so you can already see why I want to have these registration marks here, because if I line those up, this will land exactly where it needs relative to the black part right there. So the next step is to put some transfer tape, and in this case I'm going to put it on this graphic first before I put everything onto this and do the double layer. So what I'm going to do here is get a piece of transfer tape that's big enough to cover the whole graphic here. Now with this, I'm going to actually set this up a little bit better because this is curling up on me, so it's going to make it difficult to apply the transfer tape. I'm just going to take a little bit of regular tape. This is just blue painter's tape, and I'm going to put some stickiness on the bottom, on the back side of it, so that it doesn't curl up on me as I try to apply my transfer tape. Just another little hack as far as doing some of these processes for vinyl decals. So go ahead and just make that essentially double-sided. And I'm using blue painter's tapes because it sticks just long enough for the purposes I need, and then it releases really quickly and easily. All right, so with that ready to go, I'm going to take my transfer tape and I'm going to put it basically over this, and I'm going to leave excess towards the top because that's where my registration marks are. But I want to make sure everything's covered, and I'm just going to gently and carefully place it right over, and I'm going to smooth that down onto this really well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pick this up, and I'm actually going to, let's get rid of this tape on the back now. Then I'm going to just trim off the sides here. And I'm going to go ahead and trim off this excess here as well, just so I don't have so much in the way. Now the next step that we're going to do is, what we're going to do next is basically get this laid on top of this here by using our registration marks. And so what I like to do here is I'm actually going to get rid of some of this excess here because it's a little bit too much. I don't need quite that much. Cut some of that off there. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to peel this back just enough so that my registration squares are visible, but I've not peeled anything off. And I'm going to cut away the backing paper here. And now my registration marks I can see through, so I can line these up, but I don't have this quite peeled off yet, so that it doesn't stick to this prematurely. Now what I'm going to do is kind of the same thing. I'm going to put some tape on the back because you can see this slides around. I don't want it sliding around on me while I'm working on it, so I'm just going to add some tape on the back side of this as well, just to keep it in place as I try to align everything together. Again, blue painter's tape, I like to use it because it's lasts just long enough without being overly sticky. Okay, so now that I've got that all set up, what I'm going to do is try to align my two registration marks here right on top of each other and get that as perfect as possible. There and there. Okay. I'm off by a very, very tiny hair there. But now that I have that set, and I have a little excess up here because it adds another layer of stickiness so that this doesn't move on me, I will then carefully peel off the backing here. Okay. And then carefully just lay this on top. Try not to let it touch prematurely. Lay that right on top. I dropped that too prematurely actually, but it's going to work. I'm just going to gently put that down. Okay, so now that I've got that down, I've used my finger to smooth it out. Just press it all together. I'm just using a squeegee. Okay, now that I've got that all together, I don't need my registration marks anymore because that's now throwaway. Let me get rid of the tape on the back. Okay. I'm just going to simply cut this off. Alright guys, and now you have a decal that's ready to go onto whatever you want to apply this. That is a 2-layer, 2-color decal, in this case black background with red lettering.